Hello everybody and good afternoon. Thank you for coming to see me this afternoon. I'm sure happy to be here and to have this time to spend with all of you. My name is Joshua Hassan Thomas, but they called me by my middle name, Hassan. It's an unusual name, I know, but I always liked having a name that was a little different than most. My father was Captain Joshua Thomas, and I was named for him. He was a sea captain here in Calais. Papa was born in St. George, New Brunswick, and back in 1836 on the 4th of July. He used to say that even though he was born in New Brunswick, he was always a real patriot. We always laughed, even though he said that about 100 times. Well, anyway, Papa moved over to Calais and became an American citizen when he was 37, I think. It was a couple of years before I was born, I know that. I also know that he had to go down to Boston in order to be naturalized. Papa was a captain of a number of schooners that sailed out of Calais back then. One of them was called the John A. Lord. I remember that one in particular because Papa was gone quite a while on his voyages back in 1883, and we didn't know what had happened to him or why we hadn't heard anything. Mama was really worried, and even though she never said it, I knew she was afraid that his ship might have been lost. Things like that, unfortunately, happened a lot back in those days, and there was always a danger whenever they went out to sea. I was only about 8 or 9, but I knew something was wrong. Well, eventually, the schooner's owners got word that the ship had been sighted several hundred miles from Halifax. It was abandoned and her mainmast and her topmost were gone. That's when Mama received a telegram telling her that they didn't know where Papa was, but they were hopeful that since all the crew had gone missing at the same time, that they might have been rescued. Well, that was around November, I think. It was late in fall, I remember, because it was getting cold and the leaves were off the trees when we received the telegram telling us that the ship had been abandoned. Well, I can tell you that it was a really hard time for the family. Mama was brave and never gave up hope in front of us kids, but at night I could hear her crying softly sometimes. I knew she was really worried that Papa had been lost at sea, and it was a sad Christmas that year. I remember that. Well, afterwards, Mama said that even though, despite all the heartache, it turned out that the year hadn't been too bad. The next year, 1884, it was a really happy new year, because in early January we'd gotten word that Papa and his crew were in London, England. Their masts had snapped in a gale at the North Atlantic, and they'd been picked up by a British ship and taken to England. There was even a notice in the New York Times on January 2nd that year, which read, Calais, Maine, January 1st. The owners of the schooner, John A. Lord, which 6 weeks ago was reported sighted several hundred miles from Halifax, abandoned with her mainmast and her topmost gone, received a cable message from London today, announcing the safe arrival there of Captain Joshua Thomas and crew. It was some relief for everybody, I can tell you that. Somehow we got a copy of the newspaper clipping, and afterwards Mama always kept it in a drawer to remind us about how lucky we'd all been, and she used it to tease Papa about being famous and having his name in the New York Times. It made him smile, no matter how many times she said it. You know, come to think of it, Papa always seemed to be having some kind of adventure or another. Another time when he was the captain of the Ernest J. Lee, they were sailing up the St. Croix River when they went ashore on the upper end of Deschutes Island, just about opposite the plaster mill down at Red Beach. Papa was on his way back from Boston on that trip. He had a full cargo of merchandise with him. The ship went into the rocks in such a way as to break her mainmast. The currents could be treacherous in the river, and even though Papa was a good sailor, accidents do happen sometimes, even to the best of captains. Well, before they'd hit the rocks, the mast had gone completely overboard, and the schooner was starting to fill up with water. She was beating it up against the river against a strong tide, when the wind failed, and that's when she was carried onto the rocks, in spite of all the crew's effort to prevent that from happening. The cargo consisted of 2,000 bushels of corn, 590 barrels of flour, 8 or 9 tons of phosphate, several casks of molasses for Mr. C.R. Pike and Son, and a quantity of other goods. So you can imagine that they didn't want to lose all that valuable stuff. But I hate to tell you, all of it was damaged and beyond repair, and a lot of it was completely lost as well. As much of the corn as they could get out was towed upriver and disposed by the boat, and it was sold off at only 20 cents a bushel. At that price, it sold as fast as it could be measured out. The Calais Advertiser reported that the Ernest J. Lee was the first vessel they'd known to go ashore on Deschette's Island, but some of the older men said that they'd known one or two other ships that had gone ashore up there. Unfortunately, Papa had an interest of about $2,000 in this particular vessel. That was a lot of money back in those days, and there was no insurance on it, so it was all lost. Two local fellers, Alfred Towers and a Mr. Waite, took on the job of getting the schooner off the rocks, and succeeded in doing a first-rate job, Papa said. They used hogsheds to float the vessel and tow her over to the beach at Plaster Mill Cove. Then they worked on her right there and patched her up tight enough to keep her afloat, and they got to tug to tow her up to Callus in the high tide the next Saturday. Well, I surely admired my Papa. I wanted to be just like him. I loved the river, and I knew when I was older I was going to be a sea captain just like him. I used to imagine the adventures I'd have, the places I'd get to go, and even the wrecks I'd be rescued from, just like Papa. However, I'm afraid that it just wasn't in the cards, as Papa said, because when I was only 12 years old, I had a terrible thing happen to me. It was a hot day in the July of 1887, and I was playing around the lower part of town, near Jarius's Hill, with two of my friends, Artie Cogswell and his brother Jed. Artie was a little older than me, and Jed was about a year younger than I was. Their father was a sea captain from Callus too, so you can imagine we'd known each other for pretty much our entire lives. Well, anyway, we were horsing around, having a good time looking for treasures like we'd often do. You can find some really great stuff down there. There was always something coming ashore from all the ships going up and down the river. Well, it was really hot, so we decided it was a perfect day for a swim. This particular day, we decided to go in the water to cool off. It was a beautiful day, so we scrambled out of our clothes and jumped into the cool water. It felt really nice, and before we knew it, we were splashing each other and leaping around in the water. Then one of the boys, I think that it was Artie, because he was bigger and stronger, got the idea that we should try to swim across the river to the other side. Before we thought much about it, we were heading into the middle of the river. I remember that after a few minutes, I began to realize that the river didn't look as wide from the shore as it seemed when we were trying to swim across it. Then we hit the current. It was really strong, and before we knew it, we were all struggling against it. I think I remember that Jed went under first. He just disappeared, and Artie and I got really, really scared. We tried to find him, but he didn't come up again. He just disappeared and was gone. We knew we had to get back to shore, but it was really hard, and we couldn't get in the current. So it was really strong, and we were getting really tired. I don't remember a lot, only seeing Artie go under about the same time that I went under. For a minute I could see him close by, and I even touched his hand and grabbed his shoulder. Then I don't really remember what happened. It was just over, and we were gone, I guess. So I never got any older than 12. I never got to go to sea like my father, like I always wanted to do. It's funny how things happen. One minute it's a hot day, and you're having a great time, and you're playing with your friends and enjoying the cool water of the St. Croix River. The next it's just all over. Well, I can tell you that's one time I would have just put up with the hot weather if I'd known that was going to happen. I expect it was hard on Mama and Papa. I felt bad for Mama because she had worried so much about Papa when he was lost at sea, and here was me who drowned, almost in our own backyard. Well, that's my story. I thank you for letting me tell it to you. It's been a great day for me being here with all of you. The best day I've had since that day back in 1887. I hope you'll come again to visit me. I know you have other people to visit, so I'll let you be on your way. Thanks for coming. Goodbye.